I mean, Stephen, for real, if he was on the street and there was a situation, you wanted this Hollywood guy by your side because he could defend himself.
What happens when your favorite action hero isn't the hero you thought he was?
Who's a tough guy? Do I think Michael is a tough guy? No. Do I think he's a martial artist? No. Do I think Jean-Claude's a tough guy or martial artist? No.
Steven Seagal had a lot of fame, movies, and money, but things got messy behind the scenes. There were fights on set, shocking claims, and a sudden fall from grace that no one saw coming. It's not just about Hollywood. It's also about power, ego, and what happens when you break the rules. Fasten your seatbelts, because you're about to find out the truth that they didn't want you to know. Richard Gere. In the early 1970s, Hollywood wasn't a great place for artists who were having a hard time. There were no stars like Richard Gere and Steven Seagal back then. They worked hard for small roles and did anything to stay on set. The movie was called The Lords of Flatbush, and it was a rough, low-budget attempt to show how unruly street life feels. The budget was small, the production was disorganized, and there were a lot of young players who were eager to show what they could do. The set was never going to be comfy. It was hot, crowded, and rough where the filming took place. Food was brought out quickly during busy breaks, but no one was given extra attention. In that kind of setting, even small problems could turn into big ones, especially when feelings were at stake. Richard Gere used to be in plays. He was sure of himself and polished, and people often judged him by how he said his lines and acted in a scene. On the other hand, Steven Seagal was becoming known as someone who loved being physically strong and having a strong need to show that they were tough. From the start, they were like oil and water. Seagal was very intense, while Gere was smooth and calm. Things got worse until one lunch break tipped them over. While Gere was eating a hot dog with mustard, a drop of mustard hit Seagal's pants. The stars were squished together in a car. Something that could have been laughed off turned into a very tense moment. Seagal didn't think it was a mistake. He thought it was rude. The car stopped making noise. Everyone knew that Seagal wouldn't hold his temper in. He lashed out right away. He hit Gere in the arm and pushed him out of the car. It wasn't about the mustard. It was about who was willing to give up their pride and their power. Seagal checked that day to make sure it wasn't him. The effects were felt right away. Gere's part was planned out. The producers didn't want any more trouble on a set that was already busy. The official story said it was because of creative differences, but the truth quickly spread in Hollywood. People found out about the mustard thing. Steven Seagal's bad money mood was the reason Richard Gere was fired. People learned a lot about Seagal from this one fight. His tough attitude didn't just show up in his movies, he brought it with him everywhere. Someone who was very sensitive to any sign of disrespect and ready to fight was what people thought of him. Hollywood took notice. Gere, on the other hand, got better quickly. With movies like American Gigolo and Pretty Woman, he became a big star. But the story about the time he got into a fight with Seagal never went away. In Hollywood, the event became a whisper network tale. People on the set told each other about it like a joke. Steven Seagal fired Richard Gere for mustard once. It wasn't about food, it was about pride and power. That one small thing set the tone for how Seagal would act for the rest of his career. When asked about Gere years later, Seagal didn't back down. He called him cocky and made it clear that he thought people should earn respect. Seagal had a simple message. People had to respect him on set. It was bad to cross him, even if it was just by chance. The mustard incident also showed how Seagal's business would grow. His movie figures were all about getting back at people quickly, setting limits, and never letting disrespect go. He wasn't just angry when he talked to Gere, it showed what kind of man he was, someone who acted quickly and firmly when he was questioned. An interesting side note that isn't talked about much is how this also changed Gere's public image. Even though Gere never said anything about it, people who know him say it made him even more determined to stay away from violent co-stars and Hollywood fights. For example, Seagal worked hard to make himself seem scary, but Gere tried to be more charming, romantic, and like a more polished leading man. A fight over mustard that was spilled in a car helped shape two very different paths. Most people don't see this, but this event also shows how fragile identities were back then. Someone's part could be cut, casting decisions could be changed, and even careers could be changed by a single outburst. Hollywood didn't forgive. Gere was lucky that his work got better and better. But for Seagal, this early fight wasn't a setback. It became the basis of his reputation. If mustard could start a war, just think what happened when bigger problems like money, loyalty, and disloyalty came up. Also, talking about crossing lines, if mustard could start such a nasty fight, wait until you see what happens when loyalty is traded for money. The next part goes from small fights to deep betrayals, and it hurts even more. Bruce Willis. At the end of the 1980s, action movies were huge, and Bruce Willis and Steven Seagal were the stars of them all. Seagal, an Aikido master with a mean glare and an even meaner temper, was making a lot of money with movies that mixed martial arts with brutal, street-level reality. Willis was the everyman action hero after the huge success of Die Hard. People cheered for him because he wasn't a huge, muscled monster, but still beat the bad guys with grit and attitude. Two guys who were changing what it meant to be an action star respected each other and were almost like brothers. It wasn't rare to see the two of them together back then. It became normal to go to business events, parties late at night, and quiet dinners in places with dim lighting. Willis was famous, but Seagal admired how he handled it, and how he could balance big hits with smaller, more character-driven parts. Willis admired Seagal for how hard he worked at his craft. They had different styles, but were both very hungry. They were both kings at the top of their game. For a while, Hollywood thought they couldn't be hurt. And then there was The Expendables. The first movie, which was created by Sylvester Stallone, was a tribute to classic action movies. It brought together stars from a golden age that fans thought would never come back. It was full of fireworks, one-liners, and memories from the past. The first movie did better than anyone thought it would, making over $270 million at the box office. The second one was even worse. It was clear that the series was more than just a movie. It was a movement that brought back all the things that made people love action movies in the first place. Sly wanted to make the third movie even bigger. There are more stars, size, and everything else. Bruce Willis was supposed to be there as the sarcastic CIA agent Mr. Church for the second time in what was meant to be the ultimate reunion. The question that changed everything, though, was asked. The people who work for Willis made a demand: $4 million for 4 days of work. Every day, $1 million. There is no room for compromise. No giving in. The movie business is used to big numbers, but this one hit in a different way. Seagal, who had been interested in the project but didn't want to be the center of attention, thought the move was a betrayal. The Expendables series was built on more than just money. It was built on friendship, loyalty, and an unspoken code between the men who worked together to build the genre. What Willis asked broke that rule. Some people behind the scenes were furious. They thought it showed that Willis had forgotten what the job was all about. and had instead put business ahead of family. The damage was done right away. With no fuss or ego, Harrison Ford stepped in and played the part. He showed up to work with the level of professionalism that kept the machine running easily. It was clear that things had changed and that there was stress around the project. Seagal didn't say anything. He didn't hold back when he used harsh words around private people or in casual conversations, making Willis look like he had turned his back on everything that had made their action era great. For Seagal, it wasn't just a disagreement over a contract, it was about them. He wouldn't give up his loyalty for anything, and it was worth a lot more to him than any paycheck. Seeing someone he used to admire put a price on their relationship hurt him more than he ever said in public. In Hollywood, friendships and alliances can dissolve as soon as the cameras stop rolling. This event proved Seagal's view that loyalty wanes when the stakes are high enough. The third movie did well too, but the mood had changed. At first, it seemed like a celebration of friendship, but now there was a dark side to it that showed not all stars followed the same rules. That memory was like a quiet scar on Seagal's body. It was another warning that trust was always weak in a town built on lies. As time went on, both men's lives went in different directions. Willis stayed in the center with a mix of action thrillers and dramatic roles, while Seagal stayed away from Hollywood even more, finding work overseas and making a second act that was less dramatic but just as controversial. Still, the memory of that moment stuck with them. The change from friendship to breakup, from unity to betrayal. When Seagal lost a friend over money, it hurt even more. What happened next would hurt even more. The next person on his list wasn't just another movie star or co-worker. That person had been closer, a man who made it hard to tell the difference between a friend and an enemy. Because of his ties to Seagal's personal life, a building tension would explode in a way that Hollywood would never forget. Eddie Murphy. By the end of the 1980s, both Steven Seagal and Eddie Murphy were huge stars. Seagal was a tough action star with a black belt and a cold stare. And Murphy was a powerful comedic force whose movies like Beverly Hills Cop and Coming to America made a lot of money at the box office. When they weren't in front of the cameras, their lives were more similar than anyone thought. They knew the same people, went to the same fancy parties, and respected each other in a way that only two guys at the top of their game could understand. They thought there was trust between them, even though Hollywood was a jungle. While they were shooting Beverly Hills Cop 2, that trust began to break down. Brigitte Nielsen, who was Seagal's wife at the time, was in the movie. She was beautiful, captivating, and hard to ignore. Because of her huge size, she was always the center of attention. The schedule was full, and there was a lot going on. As with most film sets, the long hours made people get to know each other. At first, it was nothing, just friendly chats, laughs, and exchanges that no one gave a second thought to. But in Hollywood, small talk can quickly turn into whispers. There were whispers among the crew that Bridget and Eddie were spending more time together than normal, having a quick laugh while you're bored. A small talk in the set's corner. There wasn't much information given, but it was enough to get people talking. In Hollywood, where rumors fly like flames, what people think is often more dangerous than what is true. Those words got to Seagal very quickly, and when they did, they hit him hard. For Seagal, commitment was more than just a word. It was the basis of all the relationships he cared about. And when you were loyal to your friends, there were lines you never crossed. No matter how false the reports were or how far-fetched they were when they got to him, he didn't care. He saw rudeness as a friend going where they shouldn't have been allowed to go. The tension built up slowly but surely. They used to go to events together, but now they felt awkward. like everyone there knew something was going on but didn't say it. People who worked in the industry noticed the change right away. Where there used to be smiles and easy friendship, there was now quiet and space. That quiet meant more to Seagal than any denial could ever say. The damage was already done by the time the movie was over. The fun times they had together, the late-night hangouts, and the respect they had for each other were all over. Hollywood took notice. They were never pictured together again, seen at events together, or talked about the break in public. The friendship didn't just get weaker, it broke up totally. Seagal learned a hard but clear lesson. Fame could open up doors, but it also made every slight and betrayal seem worse, whether they were real or imagined. He thought trust was valuable, and once it was broken, there was no going back. Seagal, on the other hand, buried himself deeply in his work, putting out film after film with that simmering intensity in every role, while Murphy's career took off in the 1990s. The years went by, but the aftermath of that event stayed with them. The story became part of Hollywood's quiet history. It was one of those stories that was told behind the scenes at industry dinners and in green rooms. It was never confirmed or rejected, but it was always remembered. People from the outside may have thought it was small or even pointless, but for Seagal, it wasn't about the rumors. It was about loyalty, pride, and respect. Three things he values more than fame itself. But if the fight with Murphy showed how fragile friendships could be when you're famous, the next part of Seagal's story showed how things could get when a young star's ego met the unbending force of an old Hollywood legend. It was a fight that would test his patience, his pride, and his place in the business forever. Kirk Douglas. As a child, Steven Seagal watched Kirk Douglas rule the big screen like no one else. Douglas felt like he was bigger than life in movies like Spartacus and Paths of Glory. He was the kind of star who couldn't be harmed, the very definition of old Hollywood power. Being able to work with a figure he had admired since he was a child was like coming full circle for Seagal. He saw it as a link between the tough guy heroes of the past and the new generation of action stars he thought he represented. But in Hollywood, praise doesn't always mean respect, and Seagal quickly learned that. From the first meeting, things were tense. Douglas walked with the confidence of someone who had worked in the field for decades and thought he had seen it all. When Seagal was at the height of his rising fame, he wasn't going to shrink when he saw anyone, not even a Hollywood star. The set turned into a quiet battlefield where egos clashed in every choice, line, and talk. There were no fights or fistfights. Douglas didn't hold back what he thought because he had sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. He thought Seagal was too rough and unpolished. He saw him as a martial artist trying to be an actor. Seagal always had good ideas for scenes or lines, but Douglas always shot them down. She would sometimes smirk and shake her head as if to say nothing, but she would always do it with the power that comes from being in charge for decades. It wasn't just criticism for Seagal. It was a clear challenge. He was no longer a beginner. It was strange that someone was treating him like a beginner when he had worked hard and built a name for himself in the business. Every take, every whispered word between team members, and every time Douglas made it clear that he thought Seagal should be quiet and do what he said, made things more tense. It wasn't a loud debate, but it went deep. Notes on the script turned into arguments. Arguments turned into tense standoffs. Douglas wanted to have more say over the scenes and pushed for rewrites and changes that would make the story fit his ideas. Seagal wouldn't give in. He had worked too hard to get here, and his style and skills were being called into question by someone who didn't like what he brought to the screen. One rough afternoon was the breaking point for everything. Tensions that had been building for weeks finally burst when Douglas turned down Seagal's offer in front of the crew. It felt like everyone on set was holding their breath at that time. Seagal didn't yell. He didn't argue back. The team was shocked, and the production had to quickly pick up the pieces after he left. That walk-off wasn't just for that one play. He was making a point by drawing a line in the sand and saying he wouldn't stand for disrespect, not even from someone who had built a career before he ever did. The damage could not be fixed after that day. The business connection was over. It became hard to ignore the quiet tension as scenes were shot separately and conversations were run by assistants. After the job was over, Seagal left without saying a word or shaking hands. He didn't even turn around to look back. The respect he had for Douglas was gone, replaced by a harsh truth that would never leave him. Old Hollywood didn't like newcomers, especially ones like him who wouldn't follow their rules. In comments many years later, Seagal didn't try to hide the memory. He talked about the fight without holding back. He didn't see it as a loss, but as the moment he learned that, in Hollywood, you don't get respect just because you sell a lot of tickets or get a lot of hits. You can either take it or leave it behind. Seagal never walked away because he was weak. He did it because he wanted to be in charge. He wasn't interested in following custom or appeasing the egos of people who thought their years of experience in the business made them untouchable. That fight with Douglas made him believe in one thing for the rest of his career: stand your ground, even if you're the only one. Arnold Schwarzenegger. There wasn't a lot of quiet or subtle competition between Steven Seagal and Arnold Schwarzenegger. It began at the Golden Globes in the late 1970s, a long time before either of them became well-known as action stars. It wasn't long before Seagal became known as Hollywood's mysterious martial arts genius, the guy who really knew how to fight and had a sharp edge that made casting directors take notice. Arnold, on the other hand, had just started to transition out of bodybuilding. He used his charm and huge personality to break into Hollywood. That night, the room was full of power and ego, and people who were there say Arnold made a joke about Seagal's cool, collected attitude. It wasn't anything too rude, but it was enough to make an impression. He didn't laugh, Seagal. The quiet tension between the two men never really went away after that. The rivalry had grown into something much bigger by the mid-1980s. After hits like Above the Law and Hard to Kill, Seagal built his reputation on clean, quick, and violent action movies that looked a lot like real life. Arnold, on the other hand, was changing the way big movies were made with Conan the Barbarian, The Terminator, and Predator. Their styles were very different from one another. Seagal was smart and steady, and he sold every fight perfectly. Arnold was a show. He had huge muscles, huge blasts, and stories that felt like they were straight out of comic books. But Hollywood can only have so many biggest stars, and neither man wanted to be second best. During the 1980s, they followed each other around like predators, with each new movie being a sly competition. When Seagal did razor-sharp dancing in Marked for Death, Arnold did Commando, which was all chaos and destruction. Arnold's Total Recall was full of action set in the future and crazy special effects. Seagal's Out for Justice was even more realistic and grim. It wasn't just about how much money the movies made. It was about who really owned the field and who was in charge. The press loved it. There were magazine articles that compared their box office numbers. Fans argued about who would win in a real fight, and producers quietly fueled the feud because they knew it would sell tickets. People back then were always making fun of other action stars in interviews. For example, Arnold called other stars too serious, and Seagal called heavy-set heroes cartoon characters. Even though the words were picked out with care, everyone knew who they were meant for. The stress showed up in pop culture too. Arnold wrote jokes about Seagal into his stories. For example, in Twins, Arnold makes fun of a Rambo poster, which isn't meant to be subtle but is a jab at the industry's focus on masculinity. In return, Seagal gave Schwarzenegger mean little nods in his own movies, lines, and scenes that fans still argue were meant to be shots fired at him. There was a strange kind of respect between them, though, beneath the jokes. Both men worked hard, pushing each other to make things more dangerous. Arnold's huge box office hits might not have pushed Seagal to improve his choreography and make sure that his movies always had sharp, realistic action. Arnold might not have doubled down on making bigger, more memorable movie worlds without Seagal's laser-like focus. Things began to change in the action world in the late 1990s. The genre changed as new characters and ways of telling stories came along, and both men could feel the change. The competition, which used to be very sharp, began to dull. By the early 2000s, they had kept the tension between them under wraps. They went to events together, smiled for the cameras, and even laughed together, which would not have been possible when they were at the top of their game. Even though things got better over time, the rivalry's mark never went away. He would sometimes joke about it in interviews, saying that Arnold always had to be the biggest guy in the room, but he would always do so with a bit of respect. Arnold, on the other hand, often praised Seagal's skill and unique style, being sure to say that no one else was quite like him. Arnold and Seagal's rivalry was based on ego and competition, but Seagal's next story was about a fight with someone else. It was about the guy looking back at him. Jean-Claude Van Damme. If you watched action movies in the 1990s, Steven Seagal and Jean-Claude Van Damme were the only ones who really fought. Both Seagal and Van Damme were on a high. Seagal was famous for his sharp, grounded fight scenes and cool, stoic personality. Van Damme was famous for his kicks, boyish charm, and big hits. Behind the camera, though, the two stars fought in a way that would go down in Hollywood history. It began with Seagal making a casual statement. He questioned Van Damme's martial arts skills in an interview, joking that the muscles from Brussels wasn't as tough as he seemed. People who know Van Damme well and have seen him fight professionally for years were hurt by what he said. It was the start of a competition that was quiet at first, but built up over the years. That quiet strain finally broke through in the late 1990s. They met at a party in Miami that Sylvester Stallone was throwing. They were in the same room. As soon as they looked at each other, the mood changed. Guests whispered as Van Damme, angry over being treated unfairly for years, challenged Seagal right then and there. He was ready to fight in front of the best actors and actresses in Hollywood. He is known for keeping his cool, so Seagal didn't take the bait. He walked away without saying a word, leaving a stunned crowd behind him. Van Damme wasn't done yet, though. Later that night, he went with Seagal to a different place to settle things for good. Again, Seagal tried to avoid the fight by sneaking off into the night without throwing a punch. Fans made up stories about that moment, where two action heroes circled each other but never actually fought. The strain didn't go away as the years went by. When casting for The Expendables 2 began in the early 2010s, both guys were sought after. It was said that Van Damme made it clear that he wouldn't work on the movie if Seagal was in it. The door shut quickly. Fans had hoped that they would work together on screen, but it never happened. The rivalry continued in interviews, talks, and small jabs during press trips. Time, on the other hand, can ease even the worst offenses. By the beginning of the 2020s, both men had taken a step back from the extreme fame of Hollywood. After living through many hard times and leaving behind a legacy, they now saw the battles they faced from a different point of view. Then, in the spring of 2025, Jean-Claude Van Damme showed up at Steven Seagal's birthday party, which no one saw coming. Photos of the two icons together showed them smiling. It looked like the men had finally chosen to forget about the past. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories. And click on the next video popping up on your screen. You won't want to miss it.